So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here in the forest of Sri Lanka. This is kind of at the end of a little path, and so I thought to record a short awada for the internet. So I thought that maybe could start with just a little bit of meditation, so can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose or the face, can just let those relax. And can focus attention on the breath at the tip of the nose. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, can try to make one's awareness of the breath as continuous as possible. Being aware all the way through the in-breath. As the in-breath turns to the out-breath, all the way through the out-breath, and as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again. Trying to keep awareness as continuous as possible. And if the mind wanders away, can just bring it back again to the present moment, to the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and yeah, actually I think it's just starting to rain and getting dark, so this might be a shorter Dhamma discussion than usual, but was asked the other day by a gentleman about kind of what suttas in the canon do people generally think are authentic. And so after the Buddha's parinibbana, after he died, many monks kind of got together and they recited the Pali Canon. And this is the kind of reason why we have the Pali Canon in this kind of repetitive form. It was kind of originally chanted. And so as they were leaving this recitation, then they met another monk and they said, please approve of what we've done. And he said, what you've recited is well recited, but I'll remember the Buddha's teachings as I heard them. So what that means is that they probably kind of put them in a formulaic mode, but that there were other, possibly other monks who might have heard them differently, or there might have been a few suttas that were not there. And so those monks said they would remember them as they'd heard them. And so at the time of the Buddha, actually, the way that the texts were divided is different. It wasn't into these, these four Nikayas. It was four Nikayas. It was actually divided into like birth stories and all these different things, like question and answer sessions, various things. And so we're not actually too sure when they got divided into the four Nikayas. But at some point there was a kind of, they felt that this would be kind of maybe an easier way to sort or organize them. There were these two councils. The first council was where all the monks got together, led by Venerable Mahakassapa, to try to recite the Buddha's words. And there was a second council about 100 years later. So it may have been at the second council that they put them into the four Nikayas, we're not sure. But in any event, at some point they did get divided this way. And then certain monks would specialize, it seems, in these individual Nikayas, either memorizing a whole Nikaya, or they would have certain groups of monks who might memorize chapters of Nikayas. This is another thing that I've heard coming from the Sri Lankan tradition. They called them Banakas, the Banaka dynasty, because they would pass along this division of the Nikayas. And so in any event, these Nikayas, they probably started to become kind of useful. This is one theory that I heard, to particular groups of monks for different purposes. So especially one can see in the Digha Nikaya, there seems to be quite a lot of kind of like very long stories that, sometimes one might feel, I'm not sure how this one could have happened, And one possibility for that is that sometimes there's these very short phrases in the rest of the canon that don't fully describe an event or don't fully describe something. And it's possible that later generations may have taken a short phrase, although we're not sure, and elaborated it into a long story for the sake of possibly teaching children, possibly giving kind of long, interesting sermons at special occasions. So one of those in the Digha Nikaya is there's one called the Mahasudassana Sutta. And we don't know. It may be an authentic sutta. It's hard to say, but that one was supposed to have been given by the Buddha just before he died. And in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, it's very short. It's he's about to pass away in Kusinara, and Venerable Ananda says, don't pass away in this kind of small wattle and daub town. And the Buddha says, don't say that. There was once a wheel-turning. This was once the capital city of a wheel-turning monarch, somebody who'd conquered the whole world. And so in the Digha Nikaya, that gets stretched into this really long story. And at the end, there's not necessarily like a lot of kind of compact Dhamma. It's not, a lot of suttas are, they're teaching quite a lot of Dhamma, quite a lot of the Buddhist doctrine. This one is just a very long story. And there's a bunch like that, or maybe at least a few like that in the Digha Nikaya. So some people as well might feel that those ones possibly, although we don't know for sure, are later additions to the canon. And then as well there's the Khuddaka Nikaya, so a bit earlier had mentioned that there were some other monks after the first council who said they would remember the Buddha's words the way they heard them. And one theory that I'd heard, which again we have no way of, don't know how to prove this or disprove it, but is that, it's possible that there may have been a few suttas, a few kind of unheard things that weren't recorded at the first council that got collected and then put into this kind of lesser minor collection called the Khuddaka Nikaya. And a lot of these are kind of poems. Maybe things like the Udana and the Itivuttaka. They're these kind of things that have this short backstory and then a phrase, kind of short backstory and a phrase as far as I remember them. And so that was one monk's theory that I heard, is that, these may have been some of those suttas that the monk said, we'll remember them the way that we heard them. And so then in the Khuddaka Nikaya as well, this used to, I think, originally be the smallest Nikaya, but eventually became the largest because a lot of it seems pretty certain that there's at least 3 or 4 books that got added much later. So there's, again, as the Buddhist tradition evolved, the need may have been felt a bit to have explanations for things that weren't fully there in the canon. And so then we have stories of the past lives of all these various Buddhas. And there's also stories of like the merit that people had to make to become Buddhas. And some of those seem like they might not have been, they might have been added later. And there's also the Jataka tales, which may, and today even are, used to teach children. They're these kind of very short moral stories of the Buddha's past lives, kind of like Aesop's fables. And they sometimes take a principle that's in the suttas, and build a kind of past life story around it to illustrate that principle. There are some Jataka stories in the canon itself, in the Majjhima Nikaya, other ones. But then there's this whole book in the Khuddaka Nikaya, this big book about Jatakas. There's also the Vimana-Vatthu and the Peta-Vatthu, these stories of hungry ghosts in heavenly mansions. And some of them might be real. There's especially this one called the Tirokuta Sutta, which seems like a genuine poem. It's hard to say, of course. But then there's some as well where the Buddha will grab a woman by the arm and take her to heaven. And, we don't see the Buddha doing that in the regular suttas. So it seems like many of those might have been added later, again, possibly for storytelling effect at Dharma sermon times, or maybe at times, special times, festival times, or possibly to teach morals to children as the Buddhist tradition got more developed. Of course, we have no way of knowing this 100%. One of the things that people tend to shy away from in the Pali Canon in the West is that There are a lot of stories about psychic powers, a lot of stories about miraculous things happening, a lot of stories about past birth. And so this is one of the things that the canon in general does speak with this single voice almost. So it does seem that although it's been handed down by these Bhanaka dynasty members and handed down from monk to monk, it does seem that this is genuinely coming from a single voice, because as the Buddha says, it's kind of stripped of patchwork. There aren't really parts in it that don't fit together. So although one can have these kind of theories, okay, these suttas in the Digha Nikaya aren't real, or the Khuddaka Nikaya, some of those books, they seem more certain to be later editions. But one of the things about these things is that it's hard to know. So sometimes some of them are hard to understand by modern conceptions of science. But then again, one studies the history of science. Sometimes science goes through revolutions and finds new things. But had asked one senior monk who'd really studied the Sutta Pitaka well, and asked him, what do you think about, are there some suttas that might be later editions? There's a lot of talk about this in the West. And he said, well, when you read the suttas, read them for the Dhamma in them. So although, it's not 100% sure, unless one develops really strong psychic powers, unless, until science advances, unless it advances a great deal, it'll be really hard to completely 100% prove or disprove these things. But in the meantime, one can know for oneself when one is practicing in such a way that one's suffering increases, when one's directing one's attention in such a way that it decreases. And one can know for oneself the truth that the suttas point at. This is a truth that is said to be timeless. It doesn't depend on time and place, because all the time the principles that are in the suttas lead one way, basically. The ones, the principles that are in these kind of Nikayas, in general, the principles of the principle of impermanence, the principle of renunciation, the principle of dispassion, the principle of doing good deeds, these kind of things lead to nibbana. They lead to a deathless happiness. They lead to a happiness that doesn't change. So for people who take the suttas and use them for this purpose, then we don't have to worry so much about 100% whether all of them were authentic or inauthentic. I mean, everybody will have their own ideas, but in general, they all tend to point at developing dispassion. They all tend to point at developing states of calm. And all these things point towards nibbana, point towards a happiness that doesn't change. So using them in this way, we use them for the purpose that the Buddha intended. And we honor those generations that passed them down to us before. Okay? So leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day, and wishing you all the best till next time.